Okay, page 65, bottom. I shook my head in disgust. You girls always have some excuse when you're beaten, I declared. She put her hands on her hips and glared at me. Look, Lars, there's no reason for you to have a chip on your shoulder. That's easy for you to say. You don't have to move. You don't have to make new friends. I certainly don't. She whirled and ran toward the house. I felt like kicking myself. Instead, I tore off after her, but by the time I came around the barn, she was already in the van. Her parents were outside talking to Aunt Cass. Oh, there you are, George, just in time to say goodbye. She turned back to speak to the Hargraves. Thanks again for coming over. I needed signatures of someone outside the family. Although loosely speaking, you're in the family. We 10th cousins are always happy to help, Cass. But shouldn't you get a lawyer to read it? Asked Mr. Hargraves. No, Ebenezer Bank told me it was perfectly legal if it's signed by 2 witnesses, and even they don't have to read it. I have an idea. Why don't you come to our party tonight? I'm sure Sandra and Eric would like to see you, and Lars would certainly have a better time with patients than with grown-ups. I glanced at Pat to see if she understood what Aunt Cass was talking about. My mom was always telling me to be more patient, but how was that better than being with grown-ups? Pat looked as confused as I was, if not more so. I'm sorry, Cass, said Mrs. Hargraves, but we have a meeting to go to, and Pat has other plans. Otherwise, we would love to come. Wouldn't we, honey? Pat gave a minimal nod. Her parents quickly got in the van and they drove off. After they were out of sight, Aunt Cass looked at me. Well, George, she said, what do you want to dress up as tonight? I'm too old to wear a costume for Halloween, I answered. Nonsense. If I'm still young enough to do it, so are you. She put her hand on my arm and gave it a little squeeze. Don't worry, George, you won't look any sillier than the rest of us. I don't wear costumes, period, I said dully. She let my elbow drop. Okay, I give up. I'm sure we'll still have a good time. We'll pull out all the stops. She wasn't kidding. We did actually pull out all the stops. On her pump organ, that is. We pulled all the organ's knobs out until it was so loud the wavy old glass window panes rattled. As I pumped and she played, I told Aunt Cass about the Nautilus exercise machine submarine pun I'd thought of the first time we'd met, only a few days before. But it seemed like a lifetime. She liked my joke, and proved it by playing the Captain Nemo piece. Da-da-da, da-da-da-da-dee-dee. I don't know that song. My mother, rigged out as Mae West, came and tapped me on the shoulder. Do you have to play the organ so loud? It's deafening. Don't be a party pooper, Sandra, Aunt Cass said, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Sure Mae West never was. Mom pointed at Cass's old black dress. Judge Banks will be here any minute, and you're not even in costume yet. Oh, but I am. I only need my makeup and hat to be ready, Aunt Cass said. She peered at me. I told Ebenezer not to come without a costume. I don't think much of a man who's too proud to put on silly clothes once in a while. There's nothing like a little foolishness to take one's pride down a peg or 2. What? I asked, feeling uncomfortable. It's just an expression, honey, Mom explained. To take someone down a peg means to humble him a little. Dad came into the forest dressed as Robin Hood in Sherwood Forest, green long johns that were silly enough to meet with Aunt Cass's full approval. Raising his eyebrows under his feathered hat, he exclaimed, Funny how Lars has always hated wearing costumes. Mom frowned in my general direction. Well, he'll just miss out on some of the fun, she said, and shooed Aunt Cass down the hall to finish dressing. While we were gone, Dad cleared his throat, the way he always does when he starts one of his man-to-man speeches. I would think you could make an effort, Lars. After all, Aunt Cass won't have too many more Halloweens to celebrate. If your mother and I can dress up to please her, I should think you could. I was saved by the knocker. At the door was an utterly dignified man, dressed formally in a tuxedo, a top hat, and a pig snout. It was Aunt Cass's old friend, Judge Ebenezer Bank. My mother came up to greet him, and babbled on about how long it had been and all that stuff. Finally, she introduced us. I looked at my blonde-wigged mother, my long-jawed father, and our pig-faced guest, and felt a little embarrassed for them. Suddenly, Aunt Cass made a grand entrance through the arched doorway. Apple-green makeup covered her face, a witch's hat sat on her white hair, and in her hand was a little picnic basket. She struck a menacing pose. "And your little dog, too," she cackled. I looked at her smiling green face, crinkled with age and laugh lines, and wondered how I'd ever thought she looked like Dorothy's witch. Toto would have eaten right out of her hand. That Halloween party was a strange mixture of fun and solemnity, just like Aunt Cass herself. Although we joked a lot as we popped corn in the old fire popper and roasted apples over the coals in the huge old fireplace, the grown-ups would sometimes forget about their weird appearances and plunge into serious topics. Finally, as she stirred hot spiced cider in the big copper kettle in a pretty witchy way, Aunt Cass said, "You know, people keep moaning gloom and doom about how horrible everything is now, and moaning about all the good old days." She sniffed. "Good old days were just as mixed a bag as any other days, old or new, and yet we muddled through." She pointed a knobby finger at me. "That's the value of history, L. George. Don't you forget it. People have always managed to muddle through, and I believe they always will. I guess it's human nature to forget the bad times, gloss 'em over, shine 'em up, and put 'em all neat and clean in the history books." She absent-mindedly scratched her head, knocking her witch's hat askew. Judge Bank took the last bite of his pumpkin pie and leaned back in his fireside chair. "By the way, Cass, I saw the Hargraves this afternoon, and they said you made a new will. She'd let me take a look to make sure it's done properly." My parents sat up a little straighter in the settles. "Oh, don't fuss about it, Eb. It's almost like my old one. I just had to change a thing or two." "But you shouldn't keep it around here. It should be in a safety deposit box," Dad said. Judge Bank, "Oof. Just you try to get her to keep anything in a safety deposit box. I've been trying for years. But no, Cass has some hidey hole that beats the bank." "I've always said that yours was the only bank I trusted, Eb," Cass said, giving the judge's hand an affectionate pat. "It's all very well to joke, Cass, but I think you should at least tell someone where it is." "That won't be necessary. Wild Indians couldn't drag it out of me. No, not even extremely civil Indians could make me tell." Aunt Cass's eyes turned to meet mine. "But somebody with the right spirit could find it." It won't be wild Indians who have to look for it if something should happen to you." Aunt Cass hesitated. "Oh, all right, Eb. I'll put it wherever you like on Monday. But I don't plan to die for a good long while. After all, I just got to know George here. I'm looking forward to watching him grow up, at least a little. Besides, I'm so relieved that the three of you are here," she went on. "It'll help me out of a muddle. There's this fellow who kept shining up to me saying as how he'd turned Penncroft into a museum of the first American Civil War. Well, all he really wanted was to glorify his own set of ancestors, who were nothing to crow about. I tried to tell him that wasn't what I had in mind, but he wouldn't listen." As Aunt Cass spoke, she looked more and more agitated. Once again she put her hand to her heart, and her face looked pale in the spots that weren't green. Dad volunteered me to do the dishes, and I went without my usual squawk. As I washed and dried the plates, I thought about what Dad had said about Aunt Cass not having many more Halloweens to look forward to. When I finished, I went upstairs to my room. I looked hurriedly through the curtains next to the wall, but found nothing I could use for a costume. I threw myself face down on the bed and tried to think. At last an idea hit me. I ran to the linen closet, took out an old sheet, and cut eye holes in it with my pocket knife. Then I foraged around Mom's room and found some blue eye stuff to smear around my eyes, where it would show through the eye holes. Finally, draping the sheet over myself, I slunk downstairs. Aunt Cass was playing the organ again, and no one heard me coming, especially since Judge Bank was singing along off-key. Da-la, dee-do-dee-do-dee-dee. It was perfect mood music for what I was planning to do. I slipped out the back door and hustled around to the front. The cold October wind whipped the sheet wildly about my ankles. I lifted the knocker and let it fall 3 times. The music stopped. I held my breath, waiting for the door to open. It didn't. Guess they didn't hear the knocker after all, I muttered. My teeth started to chatter in the cold night air. Then I decided that an unannounced entrance might be more effective anyway. I opened the door with a latch string and swooped inside. Swirling around the living room, ooh and booing like crazy. I could hardly wait to see Aunt Cass's face when she realized who this guest ghost was. Nobody reacted. Nobody at all. I was so blinded by the sheet that it wasn't until I heard my mother sobbing and whispering Cass's name over and over that I knew something was wrong. I struggled out off the sheet. Aunt Cass was lying on the floor in front of the organ. My dad was doing CPR on her while Mom hovered frantically nearby. Judge Bank spoke tersely into the telephone, giving directions for an ambulance. Mom lifted tear-filled eyes to me. Lars, give me that sheet to cover her. She may go into shock. I stood by in a kind of shock myself as Mom and Dad took turns trying to revive Aunt Cass. Finally, her eyelids fluttered open. George, she said weakly. George? I leaned over her. Aunt Cass, I dressed up for you. See? I motioned down, then remembered I wasn't wearing the sheet anymore. She managed a weak smile and repeated my name, or at least my middle name. Her eyes closed again as the ambulance arrived. We were so worried about Aunt Cass that none of us thought how odd we looked trooping into the emergency room at the hospital in our costumes. Mom went in to be with Aunt Cass while the doctors examined her, leaving the 3 of us standing in the waiting room. My teeth were chattering again, this time from emotion. In fact, I was shaking all over. Judge Bank patted my shoulder. Your great aunt has had a bad heart for years, Lars. She didn't want anybody to know about it. She hates being fussed over. The doctor told her that any agitation could bring on a heart attack. But Cass said if she had to sit in a rocker and try not to feel anything, no anger, no joy, well, that wouldn't feel much like being alive. Dad ruffled my hair. She said a long, happy life, Lars. Mom came out of the swinging door, her painted Mae West face looking weird under the fluorescent lights. Without a word, she pulled off her wig and came over to hug Dad and me. Then she said shakily, She seems to be doing better than they would expect for a woman her age. She's resting now. Can I see her? I asked eagerly. Afraid not, honey. But she told me to give you a message. A lump rose in my throat. It didn't make a lot of sense. She said something about a riddle and taking you down a peg. I guess she meant how you dressed up, just to make her happy, and she knew how much you didn't want to. Mom burst into tears. Just then a nurse came running out to get us. Aunt Cass had suffered another heart attack and couldn't be revived. It was very late when I dragged up the stairs to my room. Hardly aware of what I was doing, I started to slide into bed. Halfway down, my feet struck the carefully shorted sheet and stuck fast. Bamboozled again, I said in a choked voice, and cried myself to sleep under the canopy.